okay, why did they do this? So I'm reading it, 20 of a virus coming out of a laboratory in Wuhan, China. And I was just, what? What? Now that was at the beginning of all this. And I was receptive to all of the news coming out that we may have a problem here. We may have a problem. And, there's some people talking conspiracy stuff. And I was kind of like this about the conspiracy people, right? But as we've gone forward, now the reason we live in northern Italy, and the epicenter of where this virus first hit in February and March outside of China was northern Italy. Now, why did it hit northern Italy? And why has their death rate been so much higher than most other countries, and specifically northern Italy? A couple of reasons. First, Lombardy, which is where this occurred, has some of the highest air pollution of all of Europe. That the way the mountains are settled there, people are breathing in a lot of particulate matter every day, and their lungs are not in great shape, which means that their lungs are already vulnerable to a stress that might come in. So that was the first reason why Italy was an epicenter. There's actually three reasons. The second reason was there was a huge construction projects in northern Italy from a construction company out of Wuhan, China, that started in November of 2019. So hundreds and hundreds of people from Wuhan, China have been coming to northern Italy from early in 2019. I don't know when they started coming to plan and do all that, but there were hundreds and hundreds of people in northern Italy from Wuhan, China around the end of 2019. The third thing is called the Scandinavian paradox. And we'll get into this, but they show that epidemiological studies show that people of Italy have much lower levels of vitamin D than the rest of Europe, especially startlingly lower than the people in Scandinavian countries, which are further north. And we all know that vitamin D is produced when you get some sun exposure. And being in Italy, you get more sun exposure than you do being in Sweden or Denmark. But how come Sweden and Denmark have higher levels of vitamin D than they do in Italy across the board? How come? Well, it's because the Scandinavian countries enrich food with vitamin D. And the politics of Italy has prevented the enrichment of foods with vitamin D for decades. So vitamin D levels are lower for people in Italy than throughout Europe. And that's why it's called the Scandinavian paradox. Well, wait a minute, they're way up in the north, but they've got better vitamin D levels than the Italians do. Why is that? And then they realize it's the lack of enrichment of foods.
Why is that important? Why is vitamin D important, Tom?
Yeah, it's critically important because receptor sites are catcher's mitts, and the pitcher throws the ball to the catcher. Hormones that are in your bloodstream's just a highway. There's lots of traffic on the highway, and there's no lanes, so everything's bouncing around in there. It's going in the same direction, but everything just bounces around in there. And how do hormones get inside your cell to do their work? There is a estrogen receptor that sits on your cell, and estrogen in the bloodstream gets pulled right into that catcher's mitt for estrogen. Insulin will not go into an estrogen receptor site. Adrenal hormones, thyroid, will not go into an estrogen receptor site. Only estrogen goes into an estrogen receptor site, which turns the doorknob and opens the cell for the estrogen to go inside. Thyroid hormone, traveling in the bloodstream, goes into a thyroid receptor site. It won't go into an estrogen receptor site. Turns the doorknob, opens the cell, the thyroid hormone goes inside the cell. There are only two substances that I know of for which there are receptor sites on every single cell of your body, which means every single cell of your body needs these two substances for something, but they've got to get inside the cell or there's no receptor site, on the cell for that hormone. Those two substances are thyroid hormone, because thyroid is a thermostat on the wall inside your cell. And, like when it's cold in the wintertime, you turn the thermostat down at night when everybody goes to sleep, so you save fuel. and in the morning the furnace kicks in before people get up. You set it so that it warms up the house more. That's thyroid hormone. It determines how hot your cells work. We call that your metabolism. Every cell in your body has thyroid hormone receptors sitting on the outside of the cell, because every cell needs control of how hot or how cold it's supposed to work. The other substance for which there's receptor sites on every cell of your body is vitamin D. No other substance that I know of has receptor sites on every cell. What does that mean? Every cell in your body needs vitamin D, every cell. And there are many, many studies that show the value of vitamin D to enhance your immune system function. I'll give you a story on this because it's really interesting. Millions of people died. Depending on what study you read, 25 million, 30 million people died. They found 4 people on an army base up in the Yukon that had died in the 1918 Spanish flu and were buried in the tundra. This was 2006, I think, 2007. I'm not sure of the date. I don't remember the year. But they said, let's dig them up and find out how they died, because they're buried in the tundra, so their bodies didn't decay. They were perfectly preserved. And there's some articles in the paper, no, don't dig them up. You'll expose the flu bug, the virus. But they took precautions and they dug them up. And now with our technology, we could find out how they died. Turns out that they were exposed to this virus, and in your lungs, we have sentries standing guard to protect you from anything you breathe in. It's your immune system, and the main player is called the macrophages. So what happened for these, and when you breathe something in that's dangerous, the macrophage, the sentry, fires a chemical bullet called a cytokine to destroy whatever that is. That's a really good thing. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have that. So these high-powered rifles that fire this chemical bullet, if the macrophage detects that you've been exposed to something, you fire the bullet. But what happened for these people, all 4 people, that when they did autopsy on them, that high-powered rifle became a submachine gun. Pop, 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 pop. And we call that a cytokine storm. And these people were healthy in the morning. When they went to work, they never came home that night, and they were dead the next day. That's how quick it occurred. That was what was so terrifying about that flu. Well, the spring on the trigger of the macrophage that controls the firing, that spring, so that it pops back out after you fire your chemical bullet, that spring is completely controlled by vitamin D. So if you have a vitamin D insufficiency, the macrophage gets activated to fire its chemical bullet, but there's not enough vitamin D to slow it down for the spring to pop back out. And so you get stuck with a cytokine storm being produced. Now, there's no evidence that vitamin D is going to reverse a severe viral infection. There is a lot of evidence that it certainly is going to help strengthen your immune system to protect you. Many, many, many studies on this. A study came out of Indonesia a few months ago, 790 patients who were admitted to the hospital with COVID-19 diagnosis. If their vitamin D was below 19.5, every one of them died. If their vitamin D was above 31.5, none of them died.
Wow.
And vitamin D is such a simple test to do.